Chapter 1. The lemonade at Mrs. Avery's ball had cost 4 shillings in lemons and something close to 11 in sugar, and Eliza Cartwright, who had been holding a glass of it for 40 minutes, had priced it twice and arrived at the same unhappy total both times. Somewhere in Shropshire, 14 children were being taught their letters under a roof that leaked in 3 places, and the cost of mending that roof was £7 and some odd pence. And she was currently holding in one glass roughly a day and a half of slate work. She was not bitter about it. Bitterness was expensive too. She simply could not stop the arithmetic. It had started when her father died, and it had never entirely stopped since, and she had made her peace with being a woman who could not look at a chandelier without counting the candles and dividing by the hour. 3 chairs to her left, a man had been standing against the wall for a quarter of an hour holding a glass of champagne at an angle that suggested he had no intention of drinking it, and looking at the dancers the way a man looks at a field he has already decided not to buy. He caught her looking. She did not drop her eyes, because dropping her eyes had never once improved a situation. "The wine is not very good, is it?" she said. "No." "The lemonade is worse. I am drinking it because Mrs. Avery made it herself, and Mrs. Avery is watching, and I would rather drink 11 shillings of sugar than explain to her why I have not." She turned her wrist slightly. "If you hold the glass at this angle, the light catches the level, and no one can see where it is. It looks as though you are drinking. You can go an entire evening on one glass." He looked at her hand. Then he adjusted his own, precisely, the way a man sets a rule against a page, and he did not get it quite right, and she reached over without asking permission of anybody and turned his wrist a quarter turn with 2 fingers. "There," she said, "like that. Like this. You are a quick study. I am told I am methodical. That is what people say when they cannot think of anything warmer." He did not answer that. 2 fingers had been on his wrist for perhaps a second and a half, and he was aware, in a way he could not have defended in any court in England, of exactly where they had been. But something happened at the corner of his mouth, an event so small it barely qualified as an event. A smile that got as far as the intention and then thought better of it. They talked for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 because there was a clock over the door, and she was a woman who looked at clocks. She told him she was a schoolmaster's daughter from Renfold in Shropshire, that her father had taught the village school for 22 years and had died 3 years ago, and that she had gone on teaching it because there was nobody else, and the children were still there. 14 of them. A roof that leaked over the eastern desks, so that the 2 smallest children had been moved twice and now sat almost in the fireplace, which was warm but not, she admitted, ideal for their handwriting. She told him she had £80 a year. She told him she had read every book in her father's library twice and was now going through them a 3rd time in a different order to see whether they improved. "Do they?" he said. "Robinson Crusoe is better backward. You begin with the rescue and work your way to the shipwreck, which gives the whole thing an air of inevitability it entirely lacks in the usual direction. Also, you spend the second half knowing he will be fine, which takes the strain off. That seems a considerable liberty to take with a book." "It is my book. I paid for it in eggs." And there, in a ballroom in June, standing against a wall with a glass he was still holding at the angle she had shown him, something in the Duke of Thornfield's chest gave way. Not a break, a hairline. Invisible from the outside. Entirely load-bearing. He was about to ask her name when Mrs. Avery arrived with a jug. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Avery, in the voice of a woman who has been saving something up. "How good of you to come." Eliza's face did not change. That was the thing he noticed and did not stop noticing for 6 months afterward. Her face did not change at all. But her shoulder moved, a quarter of an inch, back and away, the smallest correction, the sort of adjustment a person makes when a floor turns out to be a step lower than they thought. "Your Grace," she said, "I did not know." "I know. I told you how to avoid drinking your wine. You did. I am going to go now. She stood. She curtsied, and the curtsy was correct in every particular, deep and unhurried, and entirely without warmth. The curtsy of a woman who had been taught the form by a careful father, and had never once had occasion to use it on an actual duke. The school is grateful for the estate's support, she said. Good evening, Your Grace. She crossed the room. She went out through the door. She did not look back, and he stood and watched the door for long enough that Mrs. Avery asked him twice whether he would care for lemonade. He did not follow. He finished the champagne instead, the whole glass, straight down, which was the first thing he had done without a reason in 6 years. He went home. He did not sleep. He had a list, not written, but he could have written it. Good family, even temperament, manageable expectations, and, underneath those three, unwritten even in his own head, a fourth. She must not make me feel anything I cannot govern. 12 women had met it. He had felt nothing with all 12, in a steady, orderly, well-managed way, and had considered the nothing to be evidence that the system was sound. He lay in the dark and thought, with the first cold suspicion of his adult life, that the nothing might not be evidence of anything at all. The next afternoon he had a call to make. Lady Pemberton, an old connection of his mother's, on a question of a subscription for an infirmary. He went because his mother had asked, and because going somewhere was better than the library. He was shown in. Lady Pemberton was upstairs and indisposed. Her goddaughter would receive him. Her goddaughter was sitting by the window with a book, in a moss-green wool dress that had been turned at least once, and she looked up, and it was her. "Your Grace," said Eliza Cartwright, "Lady Pemberton is unwell. I am her representative. I am not as decorative, but I am equally hospitable. Would you like tea?" She poured it. He watched her hands, which were not a lady's hands. There was a healed burn along one thumb, and ink under 2 nails, and a general roughness about the knuckles that no glove had ever been asked to hide. She sat down across from him and looked at him with exactly the same attention she had given him at the ball, direct and unperforming, except that now there was a pane of glass in it somewhere, closed and clean and perfectly polite. "Your Grace," she said, "may I ask, did you come to see Lady Pemberton, or did you come to see me?" "I came to see Lady Pemberton." "I believe you. I also believe you are not sorry that Lady Pemberton is unwell." He did not answer, because there was no answer that was both true and survivable. "I know why men call on women in June," she said. "I have watched the machinery from outside it my whole life, which is the best seat in the house for machinery. You have a list. I can see it from here. It is in your coat, buttoned to the top in a warm room, and in your hands, which have not moved since you sat down. I do not meet one requirement on it. You are here because something happened last night that did not fit, and it has been an inconvenience, and you are hoping this visit will settle it by showing you that I am, on closer inspection, perfectly unsuitable." No one had ever done that to him. In 27 years, no one had described the inside of his head to his face correctly while pouring tea. He heard himself say it. He heard himself say it in his ordinary voice, in the voice he used for drainage and leases, and he heard how it sounded in the room after it had left him. "You are right," he said. "You are not what I am looking for." She set the cup down in the saucer without a sound. She was not angry. She was not even surprised. There was a place in her that this went into, a place she had built at 17 when she had understood, finally, and without drama, what a schoolmaster's daughter with 80 pounds could reasonably expect from the world. And the place had been standing empty for 6 years, well swept, waiting. "Then, Your Grace, you should marry someone else." She said it plainly. There was no strategy in it anywhere. He looked for the strategy, and it was not there, and its absence was the most frightening thing in the room. "I mean that," she said. "Your requirements are sensible ones, and there are 20 women in London this season who meet them and would be glad of you. You will have a quiet house and an even-tempered wife, and expectations you can manage, and you will be very content. I am not the woman who makes a man content. I am the woman who takes your argument apart over breakfast and has opinions about your drainage at dinner, and none of that is on your list." She stood up. She put out her hand, which was not something women did, and he took it, and she shook it once, firmly. And then, for the length of a breath, neither of them let go. She was already turning away, and her hand was still in his, and there was a moment, small and stupid and entirely silent, in which the whole afternoon might have gone somewhere else. She took her hand back. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Your Grace. I hope you find exactly what you are looking for. You are very systematic." At the door she stopped. "The tea is good. Lady Pemberton has it from a shop in Jermyn Street. You should try it. Good afternoon." The door closed. The Duke of Thornfield sat in a stranger's drawing room with a cup of good tea going cold in his hand, and understood, in the slow and nauseating way a man understands that the ground has gone from under him, that a woman had just told him to leave, and that he did not want to leave, and that the not wanting was precisely the sensation his entire system had been built to prevent. The system had failed. It had failed in 11 minutes at a ball, and finished failing in a drawing room over tea from Jermyn Street. Chapter 2. At breakfast, the following morning, the Duke of Thornfield ate his eggs, which is to say he did not, and read his correspondence, which is to say he held it. He read a letter from his solicitor concerning a lease renewal, and heard a voice say, "I am the woman who takes your argument apart over breakfast." He read a report on the wheat and heard, "You are very systematic." He read a letter from his mother containing 3 separate paragraphs about Miss Dawson of Hertfordshire, who embroidered beautifully, and heard nothing at all, which was worse. Simmons, standing at the sideboard with the composure of a man who has dressed the same person for 9 years, observed that the Duke had now been stirring the same cup of coffee for a little over 3 minutes. "Your Grace, forgive me. At this point it is less a beverage than a concept." Henry put down the spoon. "Simmons, have you ever been told by a woman to marry someone else?" "I have not had that experience, Your Grace." "She told me I should find what I was looking for." "And was she encouraging Your Grace, or was she disposing of Your Grace?" "I do not know." "Then she was disposing of you, Your Grace. When they are encouraging, one generally knows." At 11 o'clock, Mrs. Loach found the Duke in the library, not reading and not writing, standing at the window with his hands behind his back, looking at a square of London he had looked at for 27 years and evidently was not seeing. Mrs. Loach had served the Ashworths for 22 years. She had seen dukes drunk, dukes furious, dukes bereaved, and one duke very briefly on fire. She had not seen this. "Your Grace, is there anything you require?" "No, Mrs. Loach, I am reviewing." "Reviewing what, Your Grace?" "A conversation." "A long one, Your Grace." 10 minutes. "You have been reviewing a 10-minute conversation since 8 this morning, Your Grace." It was a dense 10 minutes. Mrs. Loach went down to her room and wrote to the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield. The letter took her 4 attempts and was, in the end, 5 lines long. "Your Grace, something has happened to your son. He is standing in the library. He will not say what is the matter. He has described a 10-minute conversation as dense. I thought it right that you should know." In the afternoon, Henry rode in the park. The route he chose, for reasons of exercise, took him along the top of Curzon Street. He rode the length of it. He turned at the end and rode back. He did this 4 times. On the 4th pass, the Pemberton stable boy, who had been sitting on the mounting block since noon, went in and told the butler, who went and told his master, who came to the window in time to see a 5th. "That is Thornfield," said Lord Pemberton. "Yes, my lord." "He appears to be lost." "He appears, my lord, to be orbiting." Lord Pemberton, who had been married for 30 years and had once ridden past a garden gate in Somerset 9 times in a single afternoon, said, "Ah!" On the 6th pass he opened the window. "Thornfield, you will wear a groove in the street. Come in and have tea." "I am exercising my horse." "Your horse requires 1 pass and a canter in the park. It does not require 6 passes of Curzon Street and a review of the railings. She is in the garden. She is reading. I shall leave the gate on the latch and say nothing further about it." Henry rode home. He did not take the gate. He handed the horse to Nash in the yard. "Shall I walk him out, your grace?" "Yes, Nash. How many times did I ride past Curzon Street?" "I could not say, your grace." "Could you not?" "6, your grace." "Thank you, Nash." Nash led the horse in, and said to the horse when they were alone, "6. He has it very bad." The horse offered no opinion. The horse had been in the family 9 years and had seen worse. The dowager arrived at noon the next day, having traveled 4 hours in a closed carriage on the strength of 5 lines from a housekeeper who had never in 22 years written her anything alarming. It was the unprecedented nature of the letter, rather than its contents, that had got her into the carriage. She found her son at the breakfast table. His eggs were untouched. He was stirring his coffee. "Henry, you are stirring." "Good morning, mother." "Mrs. Loach informs me you stood in the library for 3 hours reviewing a conversation of 10 minutes. Mrs. Loach is remarkably forthcoming. Mrs. Loach has been forthcoming for 22 years, and it is her best quality. What has happened?" Nothing has happened. Frances Ashworth sat down opposite her son. She was 53 years old. She had a face that gave away nothing without being asked twice, and gray-green eyes that he had inherited exactly. "You are stirring cold coffee. Your eggs are congealing. You have the expression of a man who has been struck in the chest by something he did not see coming and has decided to walk it off. That is not nothing. That is the precise opposite of nothing, and I have been waiting 9 years for it. Who is she?" He put the cup down. "She is a schoolmaster's daughter from Shropshire. She has £80 a year. She makes her own dresses. She told me to marry someone else." His mother did not move. "She told you to marry someone else." "She told me I was very systematic, and that I should find a woman who met my requirements, and that I would be very content." "And what did you say to her?" "I told her she was right, that she was not what I was looking for." "And then?" "She agreed with me. She wished me well. She shook my hand." He stopped. "Mother, she left. She walked out of the room." "She left," said his mother very quietly. "No one has ever left. 12 women in 6 years, and every one of them stayed in the room. Every one adjusted, accommodated, tried a little harder, or a little differently, or with more music. She agreed with me and she left, as though the room were simply a room, as though I were simply a man in it. And I have been. I have been." He did not finish. He picked up the coffee and put it down and picked it up again, and his mother watched him do it with the expression of a woman who has waited 9 years for a thing to happen, and now cannot decide whether to be delighted by it or afraid. "Henry, go back." "She told me to marry someone else." "Yes, and you will go back. Not because your system has broken, though it deserved to, because a woman who tells a duke to marry someone else is a woman who does not need a duke, and a woman who does not need you is the only sort worth wanting." She stood. "I am setting Miss Dawson aside, for the present. Go to the girl. Do not take flowers and do not take a speech. She has already seen through everything else you own." He went at 6 in the evening. The gate was on the latch. The garden behind the Pembertons' house was long and untidy and smelled of cut grass and something sweet gone over. She was on a bench under the wall with a book on her knee and her shoes on the grass beside her and her stockinged feet in it. She heard the gate. "You are in my garden," she said without turning. Lord Pemberton left it unlatched. Lord Pemberton is a romantic. He courted Lady Pemberton by leaving her father's gate unlatched every night for a month, and he has never entirely recovered from the success of it. He now leaves gates unlatched for everybody. The cat comes and goes as it pleases. He stood. She sat. He had ridden past this street 6 times in one afternoon and had rehearsed nothing, and what came out of him came out badly and all at once. I have come back. I have not been able to read a letter or write a sentence or drink a cup of coffee for 2 days. My valet has informed me that my coffee is a concept. My housekeeper wrote to my mother. My mother came 4 hours in a carriage. My stable boy counted 6 passes of this street and told me the number when I asked, which was worse than if he had lied. My entire household now knows that something has happened to me, and I cannot explain it to them, because I cannot explain it to myself, except that you told me to marry someone else, and I have thought of nothing but you since. She closed the book. Henry, she said. It was the first time. It went through him like a hand laid flat on the chest. I was not playing at anything in that drawing room. I told you to marry someone else because you should. I am not a woman who says marry someone else and means marry me. I have not the constitution for it. I meant it. I know you meant it. That is the entire difficulty. You meant it and you left, and the leaving was real. Every other woman I have met has stayed. You left because leaving was yours to do, and you did not require my permission to do it. And the room afterward was the emptiest room I have ever stood in. I have stood in empty rooms for 27 years. I did not know they were empty until one of them had you in it, and then did not. She stood up then, because sitting had become impossible, and the standing brought her nearer to him than either of them had planned. The garden was going blue at the edges. She could see the 2 days on him, in the shave he had not had, and the collar he had not changed, and she was near enough to know that he had come straight from the horse. Neither of them stepped back. That was the whole of what happened, and it went on for 4 or 5 seconds, and then a window went up in the house behind them, and Lady Pemberton's voice inquired of the evening whether anybody had seen the cat. Eliza looked at the grass. You are telling me your rooms are empty. I am telling you that you are the something I have been calling nothing for 6 years. When she spoke again, her voice was level, which cost her more than he knew. I go to Shropshire on Saturday. I am not altering that because a duke has come into the garden. If you wish to find out what is underneath the nothing, you may write to me. I may not answer at once, and you will have to survive that. You told me I am not what you are looking for. I will tell you that you are not yet what I am looking for either. You are near it, but you have come here because your system broke, and I will not be a malfunction. I will be a choice. When you can come to Shropshire because you have chosen, and not because your coffee has become a concept, then come, and bring the ring. She bent for her shoes. He got to them first and held them out, and she took them, and his fingers did not open at once, so that for a moment they were both holding a pair of old leather shoes in a darkening garden, like 2 people who had forgotten what shoes were for. He let go. And Henry, she said from the step, when you write, do not be systematic. Be honest. I have had a great sufficiency of systems. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Chapter 3. He wrote the next morning. Miss Cartwright, you told me to be honest, and I find I do not know how. I know how to be precise and correct and a duke, and none of the 3 is a thing a man is. They are all things a man does. So here is the honest sentence, and I am not going to cross it out. I have been thinking about your feet. You were reading with your shoes off, and your feet were in the grass, and I am aware that this is not a sentence a duke writes to a woman he has met twice, and I find I do not care. Your feet in the grass were the most real thing I have seen in 6 years. H. The letter arrived in Renfold on a Thursday. Eliza read it at the kitchen table, and then again standing up, and then did the only thing she knew how to do with a large feeling, which was to open her father's account book and start a new column. She headed it Correspondence, because she was not a woman who could leave a thing unentered. Paper, tuppence the sheet. Candle, half a penny an evening, the honest letters having to be written at night. Postage, nothing, a duke having a franc, which was the first time in her life that Eliza Cartwright had been on the receiving end of an economy of scale. By the third week, it was the tidiest column in the book, and she understood, with the particular horror of a woman who has caught herself, that she had been keeping accounts on a feeling in order to make it look like a household expense. She did not rule it off. She stopped adding to it, which for Eliza was a confession in open court. Your Grace, your letter was not systematic. It was also not entirely sane. You have written to a woman about her feet. I have had a number of letters in my life, chiefly concerning coal, and none has mentioned my feet, and I have decided to be flattered. I am in Renfold. The garden has run to seed in 3 weeks, which I consider disloyal. Mrs. Briggs at the end of the lane has a cough that will not clear, and I am taking her soup on Tuesdays. I am well. I am, in fact, fine. Fine is the temperature of adequate. It is not in crisis, and it is not in joy. It is the middle of the road, and I have lived on the middle of the road for 23 years, and I have lately begun to wonder whether the road goes anywhere at all. E.C. They wrote through July and August and September and into October, every third or fourth day. In August he began to write in the evening instead of the morning, because the evening letters were truer, and by September Simmons had learned to leave a second candle without being asked. He told her about the 12 women. He told her that the nothing had not been their fault, that it had been a vacancy in him which he had been calling composure, because composure was the more flattering word. He told her about his father, who had spoken to him 7 times in the last year of his life, and who had been in the same house for all of it. He told her about his mother, who had canceled Miss Dawson, and who never canceled anything. My mother has set Miss Dawson aside. She did not explain herself. I believe she read my face across a breakfast table and concluded that embroidery was no longer a competitive offering. My mother is a practical woman. She invests where returns are likely. She has withdrawn from embroidery. He told her about the ring. There is a sapphire in a drawer in my dressing room that belonged to my grandmother. It has been in the drawer since I was 19. I have opened the drawer perhaps 4 times in 8 years, and I have never once taken the box out of it. And until August, I would have told you that this was simply where the ring was kept. It is not where the ring is kept. It is where I have been keeping the question. Eliza read that with the account book open in front of her, and after a while wrote on the blotting paper, where it would not be an entry in anything, her estimate of what a family sapphire was worth in a village where the largest sum anybody had seen in one place was the rate collection. Then she scratched it out so thoroughly that the nib went through the paper, and sat with her hand over her eyes for a minute, and then went and put the bread in. Her letters changed more slowly. She was a woman who had learned to open a door 6 inches and stand behind it. In August, she told him about her father, who had taught the village school for 22 years and had written a lecture every winter for the Renfold Reading Society, and how she had taken his lectures apart at the breakfast table from the age of 11, and how he had let her, and had corrected the parts she got wrong, and had never once told her to stop. In September, she told him about her mother, who had died when Eliza was 12, and who had said to her, near the end, "The only thing anybody in that house ever said about money. You are not too poor to matter. You are too honest to be comfortable." In the same month, she told him about Anne Vane, and she told it badly, in 3 sentences at the bottom of a page, in the manner of a woman getting rid of something. There is a widow here named Vane, who does not like me, and has her reasons. Her husband was a corn factor, and left her an annuity that has thinned every year since, and she has a daughter of 19, Susanna, who has been refused twice as a governess, because she cannot keep accounts. 2 years ago, Mrs. Vane asked me to teach the girl her arithmetic, and I said no, because I had 14 children and no hours. And I was right, and I have thought about it perhaps 200 times since. That is the whole of it, and I would rather not discuss it further. In October, she told him about the drawing room. Henry, I must tell you something about the day you told me I was not what you were looking for. I agreed with you. I got up and I walked out, and my head was high, and my curtsy was correct. And I did not cry until Jermyn Street. Here is what I know about dignity. Dignity is the currency you spend when you cannot afford tears. I was dignified in that room because dignity was the only thing in my purse. It was not composure, it was a dress I put on over the crying. I was wearing 2 dresses that afternoon. The outer one was dignity. The one underneath was the worst hour I have had in 6 years of not quite enough. And I am telling you about it now because you told me about a drawer, and it seemed only fair. E.C. He read it at his desk with the window open and the October cold coming in, and he did not write back for 2 days, which was the longest he had gone since June. In the same month, she wrote something else. Henry, the new master comes to Renfold in November, Mr. Trant. He is 26, and he has a certificate, and he will be, I have no doubt, perfectly adequate. The house goes with the post. I have known since August. I did not tell you because telling you would have produced an offer. Rooms at Thornfield, a cottage on the estate, a solution, delivered by a duke, with the best will in the world and a carriage to fetch it in. I told you I would not be a malfunction, and I will not be a project either. I am going to Mrs. Briggs's spare room. It is small, and it is over the kitchen, and Mrs. Briggs talks a very great deal and has opinions on every subject, including dukes. I shall manage. I always manage. Managing is the thing I do instead of needing things. E.C. Henry read that letter twice. Then he sat with his pen in his hand for the better part of an hour. And what he eventually wrote was the only letter of the 4 months that he did not read over before he sealed it. I am not going to offer you a cottage. I am not going to offer you rooms, or a carriage, or a sum, or the name of a man in Shrewsbury who could be spoken to. I am going to sit at this desk and offer you nothing. And the offering of nothing is going to cost me more than any offer I have made in my life. Because every part of me was built to solve things, and you have told me to stop solving, and I am stopping. I am stopping. It is harder than the coffee. It is harder than Curzon Street. You are moving into a spare room over a kitchen, and I am sitting at a desk in Grosvenor Square with a great deal of money and no permission, and I am not going to touch it. Tell Mrs. Briggs I respect her opinions on dukes. H. Eliza read that one out loud at Mrs. Briggs's kitchen table, because Mrs. Briggs had asked what he had said, and it was easier to read it than to summarize it. Mrs. Briggs listened to the end with her hands in the sink. He sounds tolerable, she said. Mrs. Briggs, he is a duke. I am aware. It is not his fault. A man cannot help what he is born to. She wrung out the cloth. My sister married a man who was born to be a chandler, and there was nothing to be done about that either. Henry, that is the best letter you have written. I read it twice at the table, and once more upstairs. Mrs. Briggs says you sound tolerable. You will not understand the size of this. From Mrs. Briggs, tolerable is a standing ovation and a subscription. She has also compared you favorably to a chandler, and I am not going to explain that because if I explain it, you will try to understand it. And Mrs. Briggs is not a thing that can be understood, only survived. E.C. His mother came to dinner in Grosvenor Square in the last week of October and watched her son across the table for the better part of an hour. You are writing to Shropshire. I am. How often? Every 3rd day. For 4 months. For 4 months. Frances turned her glass by the stem. And what does she say, this schoolmaster's daughter? when you write to her every third day for 4 months?" "She says she is fine," said Henry. "She has been saying it since July. It is the only word in her vocabulary I do not believe." And there it was again, at the corner of his mouth, the smile that never quite arrived, except that this time it got a good deal further than it had ever got before, and his mother, who had watched for it since he was a boy, put down her glass and looked at the tablecloth for a moment, and did not say what she was thinking. What she was thinking was that her sister Charlotte had smiled like that in the spring of the year she married, and had been dead within 4. Chapter 4. The vestry room at Renfold was cold on the 11th of November, and smelled of damp plaster and the tallow of a room that was lit only for meetings. There were 9 men and 2 women present, which was 2 women more than usual. Eliza Cartwright was one, and Mrs. Briggs was the other, and Mrs. Briggs had come, she said, for the warmth, which was a lie so plain that nobody bothered to challenge it. Mr. Trant had come as well, and sat at the end of the front bench, holding his certificate in a leather case on his knees, as though somebody might at any moment demand to see it. He had been in Renfold 9 days, and had already been told by 4 separate people that Miss Cartwright's father held the school for 22 years, and had begun to develop the hunted look of a man appointed to a post that everybody else regards as a vacancy nobody asked for. The question before the vestry was the school. Mr. Trant required the house, which was proper, and the vestry had further to decide whether a school of 14 children was a reasonable charge upon the rates at all, given that 8 of those children were of an age to be earning, and given that Mr. Ockley, the overseer, had produced a figure of £19 11 and 4pence, which he considered excessive. Eliza had been costing the rooms since she sat down, because that was what she did in rooms. 9 men, 4 of them farmers who would vote with whoever spoke last, tallow at the front, and no candle past the third bench, a saving of perhaps 3pence, which had the effect of making every face harder to read. And she wondered whether Mr. Ockley knew that, or had simply been lucky. "It is not £19 11 and 4pence, she said. Mr. Ockley looked up. "It is £19 11 and 4pence with the roof in it," she said. "The roof is not annual. The roof happened once, in the winter before last, and you have carried it forward into 3 years of accounts, which is why the school appears to be getting more expensive every year, while consuming the same quantity of coal, chalk, and children. Take the roof out, and the school costs £11 2 shillings a year. That is 15 shillings and 8pence per child per annum. Slate work in this county for a boy of 9 is 4 shillings a week." She let that sit for exactly as long as it needed. "You are not deciding whether the school is expensive, Mr. Ockley. You are deciding whether 14 children can read. The arithmetic has been settled for 2 years. It has simply been written down wrong." Mr. Trant, at the end of the front bench, said, "Oh," in the voice of a man who has just watched something happen to a set of numbers that he had not previously known numbers could do, and then went scarlet and gripped his certificate. And into the silence, from the second bench, in the tone of a woman offering a plate of something, came Mrs. Vane. "It is a great deal of arithmetic," said Anne Vane, "from a young woman who is shortly to have no house." She was 44, and she had been handsome, and she was wearing, as she had worn to every parish meeting for 6 years, a black silk that had been very good in 1820 and had been turned since. She sat very straight. Her gloves were mended at one thumb on the inside, where she had judged it would not be seen from the front. "One wonders that she troubles herself," said Mrs. Vane. "But then Miss Cartwright has had a very great deal of correspondence this year. The postboy has remarked on it. Twice a week from London in a franc." She smiled. "One does not like to say more." The room changed temperature. Mr. Ockley looked at his papers. 2 of the farmers looked at the wall. Eliza stood very still, and inside her the ledger opened and totaled the cost of the next 30 seconds, which was the school, the 14 children, Her name in a village where her father's name had stood for 22 years, and whatever was left of the 4 months. She could have said nothing. Nothing would have been survivable. Nothing might even have carried the vote. "You may say more," she said. "I would rather you did not have to whisper it in the lane, because the lane always gets it wrong, and I would like it got right." She turned so that she was speaking to the room and not to Mrs. Vane. "I have received letters since June from the Duke of Thornfield. 2 a week, sometimes 3. I have answered every one of them. There has been no promise made to me, and none asked for, and if any of you supposes that a schoolmaster's daughter with £80 a year is going to be a duchess, I would remind you that I am the person in this room who is best at arithmetic. And I have run those figures, and I ran them in June, standing in a drawing room in London, while he told me to my face that I was not what he was looking for." Somebody's chair creaked and then stopped. "I agreed with him. I told him to marry someone else. I meant it, and I walked out, and I came home, and I have gone on teaching your children through a summer and an autumn, and not one of you noticed anything different about me, because there was nothing to notice. I have not been made an offer, I have been written to. That is the whole of it, and now you have it from me instead of from the postboy." She picked up her ledger. "You may think what you like of me. That is your right, and you will exercise it whether I permit it or not. But I would ask you to think it after the vote and not before, because Thomas Ashe is 11 and reads better than any man at this table, and what happens to Thomas Ashe has nothing whatever to do with my correspondence." The silence afterward went on long enough to be uncomfortable, and then went on longer. £11 too," said Mr. Ockley at last, to his papers. "Not 19. Not 19. Then we had better take it as £11 too." He cleared his throat. "The school continues. The schoolroom continues. The house goes with the post, Miss Cartwright, and I am sorry for it, but I cannot help the house." "I never asked you to help the house." Anne Vane did not look up from her lap. Mrs. Briggs stood, 4 feet 11 inches of her, and put her hands in front of her. "Well," she said, "that was worth the walk." Outside there was a traveling carriage at the top of the lane, with a crest on the door and 2 horses steaming in the cold. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield had come to Shropshire to look at a schoolmaster's daughter, and had gone first to the schoolhouse, where a young man with a certificate had told her, at some length, and with visible relief at having something to be useful about, that Miss Cartwright was at the vestry, and that the vestry was the 3rd door past the smithy, and that he was very much afraid they were discussing whether to keep the school at all. Frances had walked to the 3rd door past the smithy. She had intended to go in. She had stood at the window instead, in the cold, for 11 minutes, and had heard rather more than she had come for. Mrs. Briggs looked at the carriage. She looked at the crest. She looked at the lady, and then at the young woman sitting inside in a bonnet that had cost more than the schoolroom's coal. "You will be wanting tea," said Mrs. Briggs. "I have not got the good cups. The good cups went in September. You will have the ones with the chips in them, and you will be glad of them." The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, who had not been addressed in that manner since about the year 3, followed her into the cottage. It was 2 rooms downstairs and a stair in the corner. The kitchen was the parlor, and the parlor was the dining room. There was bread on every surface. Eliza went to the flour and put her hands back into it, because her hands were shaking, and there is nothing in the world so steadying as dough. She saw the older woman. She saw the girl. She understood the whole arrangement in about 4 seconds, and she did not flinch, and she would think afterward that not flinching had been the easiest thing she had done all day, because the vestry had used up everything she had that was capable of flinching. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Dawson, sit down. Mrs. Briggs's tea is brewing. It is not good tea. I apologize in advance, and I would not drink it myself." "I am sure it is lovely," said Miss Dawson. "It is not lovely," said Mrs. Briggs from the range. "It is adequate, like most things in this house. Sit." They sat. They drank tea out of chipped cups. Frances watched, and said very little, and waited for the flinch. What she got instead was that the schoolmaster's daughter, with flower to the wrist, asked Miss Dawson about herself, and listened to the answers, and discovered inside 10 minutes that Miss Sophia Dawson embroidered, rode well, read when it could not be avoided, and was informally engaged to a Mr. Harrington of Hertfordshire, whom her mother had been keeping in reserve against the possibility that a duke became available. "You are engaged," said Eliza. "Informally, my mother prefers to leave a door open." Eliza looked at the dowager. The dowager's face was doing something that took some effort to hold. "Your Grace," Eliza said, "your son is not a door. He is a person, and Miss Dawson is a person, and Miss Dawson has a man in Hertfordshire whom she likes. I would suggest that Miss Dawson be permitted to marry him rather than be driven 120 miles in November to stand in a kitchen as a visual aid." Mrs. Briggs, at the range, said, "More tea." "You are telling me," said Francis slowly, "to let Miss Dawson go." "I am telling you that your son told me in June that I was not what he was looking for, and that I told him to marry somebody else, and that if Miss Dawson is the somebody else, then he should marry her, and she should have a say in it, and that Mrs. Briggs's chipped cups are not a fit setting for a decision of that size." And Miss Dawson, who had spent the last quarter of an hour arriving at the understanding that she was a chess piece and discovering that she did not care for chess, set down her cup. "I should like to go home," she said. "I should like to marry Mr. Harrington. I do not wish to marry the Duke. I have been in 3 rooms with the Duke, and he has never once looked at me. Not unkindly. He simply did not. Mr. Harrington looks at me." She stood and shook out her skirts, and to her own considerable surprise, her voice did not wobble. "I will wait in the carriage." The door shut behind her. "We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel." Chapter 5. Mrs. Briggs put a cloth over the bread, said that she had a great deal to be getting on with in the yard, and went out into a November afternoon in which there was demonstrably nothing whatever to be getting on with. Frances Ashworth sat in a cottage kitchen with her gloves in her lap. "I came here to see whether you would flinch," she said. "I know." "You did not." "I was not sitting your examination, Your Grace. I was making bread." Frances looked at the table for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, and it went on changing. "I had a sister, Charlotte. She was 5 years younger than me, and she was the better of us in every particular that signifies. In the spring of 1801, when she was 23, she married a man named Peter Ives, who was a music master, and who was kind, and who had no money and no family, and nothing whatever to recommend him except that she was different in a room he was in." She turned her gloves over. "My father cut her. The county followed my father because the county always follows the money, and it followed him thoroughly. Every door in 3 shires. Nobody was cruel to her. That is what I want you to understand. Nobody was ever cruel. They were simply invariably not at home. She was not at my daughter's christening, and my daughter is her namesake, and I chose the name and did not send the letter." She stopped and started again. "Our father died in the spring of 1803. I sat by him 4 days, and I did not send for her. I have had 23 years to find a reason, and I have not found one. She died in a rented house in Bath in the winter of 1805, and I had not seen her in 4 years, and her portrait has been turned to the wall in the attic at Thornfield for 21. The fire moved. Nobody said anything. "So I came to Shropshire," said Frances, "to find out whether you were made of the material that survives it. And I stood at that window in the cold, and I heard Anne Vane put a knife into you in front of 9 men, and I heard what you did with it, and I have been sitting in this kitchen for half an hour trying to decide whether I am relieved or whether I have simply found a second person I am going to have to watch it happen to." And then the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, who had buried a husband without weeping, put her hand over her mouth, and her shoulders went, and she made no sound at all, which was somehow much worse. Eliza came round the table. She did not embrace her, because that was not what the woman wanted, and she had enough sense to see it. She sat down in the chair beside her, close, and put her flowered hand flat on the table where it could be taken if it was wanted. And it was, after a while, taken. "Your Grace," she said, when it had passed, "I am going to say two things, and I want you to hear both of them." "Yes." "The first is that I am not going to tell your son that you came, not because it should be kept from him, because it is not mine to tell, and if it comes from me, it will always have come from me, and he will look at you across every table for the rest of your life and see a thing he was told about instead of a thing you said." She let that sit. "You will tell him, not today, and not before I know whether there is anything at all to tell. But if I ever stand up in a room with your son, then within the month you will tell him yourself, out loud, in one go, and I will stand next to you and not say one word to help you." Francis looked at her. "That is a hard bargain." "It is the only one on offer, and it is cheaper than the other kind. Miss Dawson has been sitting in a cold carriage for a quarter of an hour. Mrs. Briggs has inspected the same water butt 4 times, and the whole of Renfold watched a crested carriage come down the lane at 2 o'clock. There are no secrets here, Your Grace. There is only who says it and how soon. I am giving you the saying of it. And the second thing. The second is that when I have a house, and I do not know when that will be or whose it will be, I want that portrait off the attic wall and hung where people walk past it. And I want you to say her name out loud when we hang it. And then I want you to tell me one thing about her that is funny. Not sad. Funny. Because she was 23 when she married a music master, and nobody who does that is only sad." Francis Ashworth put both hands flat on Mrs. Briggs's kitchen table. "Charlotte," she said, "she could not sing, not a note. She married a music master and she could not carry a tune across a room, and he used to tell people it was the great trial of his life." "There," said Eliza. When the carriage had gone, Mrs. Briggs came in from the yard. "That woman came here to swap you for a girl who embroiders. She came to see whether I would flinch." "And did you?" "No." "Good," said Mrs. Briggs. "The bread is burning." The bread was not burning. Mrs. Briggs was 68 years old and had learned at some point in the middle of her life that a room can only hold so much, and that a bread emergency is the quickest way to empty one. Eliza went to the range and took out a loaf that was perfect, and stood with her back to the room and her hands full of it for rather longer than the loaf required. That night, she wrote the shortest letter of the 4 months. "Henry, today I stood up in a cold room in front of 9 men and told them that you have been writing to me since June because a widow named Vane was going to tell them worse, and I would rather a thing were said correctly than said kindly. I also told them that you informed me to my face that I was not what you were looking for, which I offer as evidence that I am not building anything. Then I corrected the overseer's accounts, and the school was saved by £8 9 which had been sitting in the wrong column since the winter before last. I am well. I am not fine. I do not know what I am, but it is not fine, and I have decided to stop using that word. E.C." His reply came back in 4 days, and was, for a man who had spent his life being exact, almost illegible. "Eliza, I have read your letter 9 times. 9 men in a cold room. I have sat at 400 meetings in my life, and I have never once said a true thing at any of them, because I have never once had to. Everything I have ever said in a room was safe before I opened my mouth. You stood up in a village that has known you since you were born, and you told them the worst sentence anybody has ever said to you, out loud, in your own voice, and you did it to get £8 9 into the right column for 14 children who will never know it happened. I am not going to tell you what that has done to me, because you have asked me twice not to be systematic, and I do not trust myself to be anything else at present. H. There was a further matter, and Eliza had been walking around it for a week. She went on the Thursday, in the afternoon, to the house at the end of the green where Anne Vane lived on an annuity that had thinned every year since 1820. It was a good house from the front. Eliza had costed the front of that house from the lane 100 times as a girl, and it had taken her until she was grown to understand that a good front is the most expensive thing a poor woman can buy. Anne Vane opened her own door, which told the rest of it. "I have not come about the vestry," said Eliza. "I have come about Susanna." They stood in the passage, because Mrs. Vane did not invite her in, and there was no fire in the front room to invite her into. "2 years ago you asked me to teach her accounts. I said no. I had 14 children and no hours. And I was right. And being right has turned out to be worth rather less than I expected." Eliza put her hands in her pockets. "I have no schoolhouse now and no post and no hours belonging to anybody. Tuesday and Friday mornings, 8 until 10, at Mrs. Briggs's table. Bookkeeping, single entry, then double if she has the head for it, and enough of a hand to write up a household book that a Ludlow family will look at twice. I want nothing for it, and if you offer, I will be offended, and you will find I am extremely good at being offended." Anne Vane stood in her cold passage in her turned black silk with her hand still on the door. "You are doing this," she said, "because I stood up in the vestry and said what I said." "No. I am doing it because you were right about one thing, which is that I have been very free with my hours for other people's children, and Susanna was not one of them, and she was 19, and she could not do accounts, and she was the only one of them I could have fixed in a fortnight." Eliza looked at her steadily. "You were wrong about the rest of it, but you were not wrong about that, and I have found that it is possible to be told the truth by somebody who means it unkindly." And Anne Vane, who had held that front for 6 years, put her hand up to her mouth in the passage of her own cold house and did not manage to say anything at all for some while. "Tuesday," said Eliza. 8 o'clock. She is to bring a pencil. Mrs. Briggs will have opinions about her posture, and Susanna must simply bear it, as we all do. 3 weeks later a letter came for Eliza in a hand she did not know. "Miss Cartwright, my son does not know that I came to Shropshire, and I find that I am glad of the bargain you struck with me, and also that I resent it, and I have decided that both of these things can be true, and that I am too old to tidy them. Miss Dawson is to marry Mr. Harrington in the spring. I am writing to tell you that I was wrong to examine you, and that you were right to say so to my face in a kitchen, and that Mrs. Briggs's tea was, as you warned me, not good. I should like to drink better tea in future. I should like to drink it at Thornfield. I should like you to be there when I do. Francis Ashworth. Postscript. The bread smelled remarkable." Eliza read it. She folded it. She put it in her pocket, and it was still there 9 days later, in December, when somebody knocked at the door of the cottage at the end of the lane. He had ridden 120 miles in 2 days. No valet, no carriage, 1 change of horses at Wolverhampton, and a bed at an inn where the sheets were damp. He had gone first to the schoolhouse, and had stood at the gate in the frost, looking at the door, where a new name had been painted over the old one, in a paint slightly darker than the wood, so that in the flat winter light you could still read Cartwright underneath if you knew to look, and he knew to look. He stood there for a minute and a half, with his heart going in a way he did not care for. Then he asked in the village, and the village told him, "Mrs. Briggs, spare room, end of the lane." The door opened as far as a chain, and a very small woman. She looked at his coat, which was filthy. She looked at his boots, which were worse. She looked at his face, about which she had been forming opinions since July, on the evidence of letters, and since November, on the evidence of his mother. "You will be the Duke." "I am. Is Miss Cartwright?" "She is in the kitchen. She is making bread. She makes bread when she is thinking, and she has been thinking a very great deal since Tuesday. There is more bread in this house than a woman of 68 has any use for. Come in, wipe your feet. I have not got good cups. He wiped his feet. He came into a kitchen that was also a parlor, that was warm, that had bread on every surface, in which a woman with flour to the elbows, and flour in her hair, and a smudge of it across the bridge of her nose, looked up from the table. "You came," she said. "You told me to come when I could choose without a crisis. There is no crisis. My coffee is liquid. My horse has not been down Curzon Street since June. I have chosen. You look dreadful. I have ridden 120 miles. Without a valet. You told me not to be systematic. I told you not to be systematic in your letters. I did not tell you to ride into Shropshire in December without a change of linen. You have overcorrected. I am aware of it." "He wants feeding," said Mrs. Briggs from the range, with the air of a woman who has bought a ticket and intends to see the whole performance. "Sit him down. The tea is not good." Eliza pulled out a chair. He sat. She reached past his shoulder for the loaf on the board behind him and stopped, because he had turned his head at the same moment, and she was closer than she had planned to be, near enough to see the 2 days on him and the cold still coming off his coat. "Bread," she said. "Yes." She took the loaf. Her hands were not entirely steady, and she blamed the flour. She cut it. When she put the knife down, he picked it up to help, and their fingers went across each other on the handle, and his hands were so cold from the road that she said, without thinking about it at all, "Give me those," and took both of them, and turned them over, and held them in her floury ones for as long as it takes a kettle to think about boiling. Then she let go, and put the butter in front of him, and poured him tea from the pot, and the tea was not good, and he drank it anyway, and he ate one slice, and then a second, and then a third. It was the best bread he had ever eaten in his life, and he had eaten bread prepared by 4 professional cooks, and this had been made on a kitchen table by a woman with flour on her nose. He ate a 4th slice. He set it down. "Eliza." He had never said it out loud. It was the first time, and it landed in that small, hot kitchen with a weight neither of them had been prepared for. He put his hand into his coat and took out the box and opened it and set the ring on the table, between the bread and the butter. Mrs. Briggs turned round from the range. "That is a ring." "It is." "On my table." "Yes." "Between my bread and my butter." It was the available surface. "That surface is for bread. I have had bread on that surface for 41 years. I have never had jewelry on it, and I do not know that the surface can take the adjustment." "Mrs. Briggs," said Eliza, "I am raising a concern about my table." "Mrs. Briggs, please." Mrs. Briggs looked at Eliza. She looked at the ring. She looked at the Duke of Thornfield sitting at her kitchen table in a filthy riding coat with crumbs on his chin and a sapphire between the loaf and the dish, wearing the expression of a man who has ridden 120 miles in order to put a piece of jewelry down on an old woman's table, and who has plainly not planned one step past it. "I'm going upstairs," she said. "I have a cough." "You have not got a cough. Your cough went in September." "I have developed a fresh one. It has come on very sudden. It wants rest and a closed door. If anybody requires me, they should first ask themselves whether they truly require me, or whether they are only putting off a moment that does not want a woman of 68 in it." She went up. Her tread on the stairs was not the tread of a woman with a cough. It was the tread of a woman climbing 13 stairs as slowly as 13 stairs can physically be climbed. The kitchen was quiet. The fire settled. He looked at her across the table and she looked at the ring. "I have written to you for 4 months," he said. "I have told you about the 12 women and the nothing I felt with all of them. I told you about my father and about a drawer I did not open for 8 years. In October you told me about the 2 dresses. the dignity over the crying, and I read it twice, and then I could not write to you for 2 days, because I was ashamed, and because it was the bravest thing anybody has ever handed me, and I did not know how a man goes about deserving a thing like that. He turned the crust of bread over on the plate and left it. You told me in the garden that you would not be a malfunction. You were right to say it, and you have been right about every other thing you have ever said to me, and I have got very used to that. So I want to be exact now, because it matters more than anything I have been exact about in my life. I did not come because my system broke. It broke in June, and I could have replaced it by August. Any man can build another system. I came because for 4 months I have read what you put on paper, and I have known, with the only certainty I have ever felt about anything that was not a lease or a boundary, what is underneath the nothing. It is you. You did not fill the nothing. You ended it. I am not going to say that you are what I was looking for. You are not. What I was looking for was a woman who would not disturb me, and you have disturbed everything I own, and I would not have 1 hour of it back. I want the bread, and the flour, and the opinions about drainage, and the books read backward. I want the woman who stood up in a cold room in front of 9 men and said the worst sentence anybody ever said to her, out loud, in her own voice, to get £8 9 shillings into the right column. I want every room I walk into to be different because you are in it, and they already are, and you are not even in most of them. I have brought the ring, as you told me to. I am not asking you to take it out of my hand. I have put it on the table. It is yours, and it is yours when you are ready. And if you are never ready, I will not ask you for it back. The clock on the shelf went on. Eliza put out her hand and picked up the ring and held it, and turned it once, and the stone caught the fire and gave it back. Then she put it on her own finger, with flour on her hand, and the flour went into the setting and around the band, and she did not brush it away. I am not doing this because of the letters, she said, or the ride, or the ring on the table. I am doing it because for 4 months you have been honest, and the honesty has cost you your system and your list and your composure and your dignity, and you have paid every one of those and never once tried to get the change back. I am doing it because when I lost my house, you did not offer me a cottage. You sat at a desk in Grosvenor Square with a great deal of money and you did not touch it, and you told me that it was the hardest thing you had ever done, and it was. Her voice went then, and she let it go. You have had 6 years of nothing, she said. I have had 6 years of not enough. I worked out which of us was wrong in November, standing in a cold room with Anne Vane's knife in my ribs, and I have been waiting 3 weeks to say it to your face. She was crying, and it was not the outer dress, it was the one underneath, and it was neither quiet, nor dignified, nor arranged. I was never not enough. The rooms were too small. He came round the table. He stood in front of her. She came up to his chin, and she was looking up at him with flour on her nose and tears on her face and his grandmother's sapphire on her hand. The rooms were too small, he said. Yes. Mine was too. Yes. It is bigger now. Henry, she said, kiss me. You have been standing 6 inches from my face for some time, and it has become impossible to think. So he did, in Mrs. Briggs's kitchen, with bread on every surface and flour in her hair, and a cat watching from the step with an expression of profound indifference. From upstairs, after a moment, and very faintly, about time. Eliza put her forehead against his coat, which smelled of horse and road and 2 days. You taste of bread. You gave me 4 slices. You ate them all. I was hungry. I have been hungry since June. I did not know that was what it was. You have been eating nothing and calling it breakfast, she said. I intend to correct this. I should like to eat your bread for the rest of my life. That is the most romantic sentence anybody has ever said to me. The competition is not strong. I am keeping it. From upstairs. Could you keep it down? I have a cough. They walked out an hour later to see about a room for him at the inn, because Mrs. Briggs had made it clear that her spare room was spoken for, and that she was not running that kind of house. It was 4 o'clock and going dark, and the whole lane was at its windows, because a crested carriage had come down it in November, and a filthy stranger had come down it at noon, and Renfold had not had a fortnight like this since the flood. He offered her his arm at the gate. She took it, and then took his hand instead, and they went up the lane like that, past the smithy and the green and Anne Vane's good front, in the last of the light, in front of everybody. Chapter 6. They married in Renfold, in the schoolroom, on a Tuesday in December, under a special license, with a fire in the grate that the 2 smallest children still sat beside, and 14 sets of handwriting pinned along the wall behind them. Mr. Trant gave up the room for the day and stood at the back, holding his certificate, which he had brought for no reason he could afterward explain. Mrs. Briggs came and brought soup, because Eliza had brought her soup every Tuesday since July, and Mrs. Briggs believed in reciprocity, as other people believe in the calendar. The soup was excellent. She did not cry. She told Mr. Trant afterward that his handwriting on the wall was a poor example to the boys, and that he wanted to look at his letter G, and Mr. Trant, who had been in the village 9 weeks and was already thoroughly frightened of her, said that he would. Frances Ashworth sat in the second row. The night before, in the parlor of the Renfold Inn, she had said to her son, "She is not what I would have chosen. She is what I ought to have chosen. I am not certain the distinction shows me to advantage." Miss Dawson sent a letter. "I am told your wife makes very good bread. Mr. Harrington makes an acceptable scone. Perhaps in time we may exchange. Sophia Dawson, shortly, Harrington." Eliza took 3 things to Thornfield: her trunk, her father's books, and the bread recipe. Mrs. Briggs kept the cat, on the grounds that the cat had made its choice and was entitled to it. Susanna Vane's Tuesday and Friday mornings moved to the housekeeper's room at Thornfield, which was 11 miles further for the girl, and warmer by a considerable margin, and Eliza went on teaching them until March. In the second week of January, in the long gallery, the Dowager Duchess told her son that she had gone to Shropshire in November with Miss Dawson in the carriage, and why, and what she had heard through a vestry window. And she told it in one go, out loud, standing up, with her daughter-in-law beside her, saying nothing whatever. He did not speak for some time. When he did, he asked why he was being told in January and not in November. And Frances said, because that was the bargain. And Henry looked at his wife, who looked back with the expression of a woman who has no intention of apologizing for anything. "I am angry," he said. "You are entitled to be. I shall be angry for some while. I have been angry with myself for 23 years. You will not overtake me." The portrait came down out of the attic that afternoon and went up in the gallery between 2 Ashworths who had done nothing in particular with their lives. And Frances said the name out loud, Charlotte, and then said that Charlotte had married a music master and could not carry a tune across a room, and that he had told everyone it was the great trial of his life. And the new Duchess laughed in the long gallery, which had not happened in 21 years, and after a moment her husband did too, which had never happened there at all. In February, the county came, as the county always does, to look. They came to a dinner at Thornfield with their opinions folded in their gloves, and the new Duchess talked to a farmer about drainage for 11 minutes and told Anne Vane, in front of 4 other women, that Susanna had a better head for double entry than anyone she had taught in 9 years, and that the Ludlow family would be lucky, which was true, and which was worth more to Anne Vane than the dinner, the house, and the whole of the rest of the evening put together. And afterward, in the hall, in front of 30 people and 4 footmen, the Duke of Thornfield took his wife's hand, which had flour under one nail because she had been in the kitchen at 6 that morning, and did not let go of it while the carriages were called. The county saw. The county went home and reconsidered, and by June had arrived at the position that it had always known the thing was inevitable. County's will. She baked on Sundays. Mrs. Dole, the cook, regarded this in the first month as an incursion, and in the second as an education, because the bread was better than hers, and Mrs. Dole respected competence more than rank, which is rarer in a kitchen than people suppose. Every Sunday, at 6 in the morning, Henry came down and sat at the kitchen table and watched his wife make bread, and ate the first slice hot, with butter, before anyone else in that enormous house was awake. One Sunday in March he picked up the slice and bit it, and chewed it, and looked at her. Eliza. Henry. In a drawing room in June you told me to marry someone else. I did. You told me I should be very content. I did. He looked at the bread. He looked at her, flour in her hair, in the old dress, in a kitchen the size of a cottage inside a house the size of a village. I am not content. She waited. Content is the temperature of a room nobody is in, he said. I have lived in one for 27 years, and I know the temperature exactly. This is not it. The word is bigger than content, and it is warmer, and it has flour on it, and it tastes of bread, and it is 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and the room is the right temperature for the first time in my life, and I do not know the word. The word is happy. Happy, he said, as though testing a joint. It was not on your list. I do not have a list. I know. That is why you found it. She cut another slice and put it on his plate. He picked up his cup and, without thinking about it at all, held it at a particular angle so that the light caught the level and nobody could see where it was, and she saw him do it and put her hand over her mouth. You still do that? I do it every day, said the Duke of Thornfield. I have never once told you. It was the first thing anybody ever taught me that I actually wanted to know. Outside, the March light came up gray over a great deal of land. Inside, the bread was warm, and the fire was going, and the morning had barely started. She sat down opposite him with her own slice, and told him she had begun Robinson Crusoe again, from the rescue backward, and that she intended to teach it to their children in that order, so that they would grow up believing that everyone gets off the island in the end. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss new stories.